ES is almost certainly safe from the alleged Qualia leak or QStar, but what I wanted to do today was to unpack why. So the answer is fundamentally about computational complexity and encryption, and namely the P equals NP problem. And I know that I got this wrong right here, so please don't call it out. It was a typo. But so let's get some context. So if you're watching this, you're probably aware of the QStar thing, the Qualia thing, and the OpenAI debacle. Now, what I really want to focus on is QStar and Qualia, and then the P equals NP problem. So fortunately, someone was kind enough to find and send me a link to the original QStar paper. Yes, there was an actual original QStar paper where it was introduced back in March of this year. And QStar, we were all mostly right in terms of QStar is a hybridization of the A-star search function with deep Q learning or Q networks. And in this case, the high level takeaway of the paper is that QStar was able to solve a Rubik's Cube with a drastic decrease in terms of computational time. So it was just much more efficient than previous methodologies. Now, if the leaks are to be believed, then QStar might have also been used by OpenAI to contribute to the pursuit of formal logic and mathematical solutions. So it seems like the QStar algorithm is broadly applicable in the space of AI if it is being used in conjunction with various kinds of deep learning, such as the reinforcement learning that Google DeepMind is famous for, but also with GPTs that OpenAI is famous for. It does seem like the QStar algorithm is a really important breakthrough with wide implications, which is something that I kind of, my intuition was kind of tingling. To me, it felt like it was as significant as Word2Vec. Maybe not quite that significant. Time will tell, because it's very difficult to predict how much a single algorithm will ultimately change everything, because there is a huge amount of unknown space, which is actually part of what today's video is about. We're going to talk about computational complexity and mathematics and stuff, but don't worry, I'm not going to go super deep, because I was pretty rusty on this. It's been a while since I've studied cybersecurity and encryption. So this is going to be mostly an Explain It Like I'm 5 video. But just for some quick reference, this is the Qualia leak. So if I refer to the Qualia leak, this is what I'm talking about. It's not even certain if this is, one, true, two, whether or not it's even from OpenAI, because they don't mention anything from OpenAI. They don't mention QStar or GPT. They do mention Qualia, which starts with a Q, but that's about where the similarities end. And another thing is, this doesn't look like an actual screenshot of an email. This just looks like a text document, because the subject line usually is a different format. Pretty much all email clients look different than this. So anyways, this has been pretty thoroughly debunked. Everyone from Jan LeCun to Gary Marcus and lots of cybersecurity experts and mathematicians have all weighed in, and they said that whatever the Qualia leak is probably bunk. QStar is nothing to write home about. Again, the original paper came out in March. And so let's put it this way. Yes, encryption is like a Rubik's Cube in terms of, the problem space and solving problems, but it would be literally a quantum leap to go from solving a Rubik's Cube in March to breaking AES 192 just a few months later. So in all likelihood, that Qualia leak is completely and thoroughly, totally debunked, almost certainly written by a troll. And again, we hope that it is false. We hope that it is a hoax, because that level of decryption, even if it's remotely possible, then every national security agency on the planet, America, Russia, China, Germany, Japan, every single one of them will be rushing to duplicate that, which could throw the entire geopolitical stability of the planet into chaos. So we hope that it's false. However, the last thing that I'll add in context before I move on, and I'm not going to mention OpenAI the rest of the video, is that alleged comment out of OpenAI that whatever they've discovered is a quote-unquote threat to humanity. That doesn't answer that. So we still don't know what that is or the validity of that statement. Again, it's all leaks. It could have been misinformation. It could have been misdirection. And then, of course, OpenAI has been very, very quiet the last week since all this blew up. And I suspect the lawyers got a hold of them and said, guys, shut the hell up. You hit rock bottom and you broke out the jackhammer. Stop talking. So I don't suspect we're going to hear anything from OpenAI for a while. And if anything does go to court, I suspect it'll be settled. And part of the mediation will be that it'll be all sealed. If there are investigations from regulators, from CIA, NSA, whatever, that's all going to happen behind closed doors, and it's going to be locked away, and we're never going to hear anything about it ever again. Whatever is true or not. So that's the end of that, as far as I can tell. We could be surprised. Obviously, so there might be another leak, there might be an investigation, who knows? But that's it for this video in terms of OpenAI. So now let's talk about computational complexity. And before you glaze over, I'm going to make this as accessible as possible. Again, as an IT infrastructure engineer for many years, I was close to cybersecurity experts, network security experts. This was part of my job, so I'm going to explain it to you as simply as I can, as I would to some non-technical person. So the first concept that you need to know is tractability. So a tractable problem is something that is solvable in a reasonable amount of time. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it basically comes down to a tractable problem is something that, given the size of the problem space and the computational abilities that you have, can you actually solve the problem in a reasonable amount of time? An intractable problem is something that it's just not reasonable to try and solve. And an example, my go-to example of an intractable problem is simulating the entire universe at the atomic level. That is just too computationally complex to do. It's just not going to happen. And so what we do for large complex simulations is you find abstractions and proxies, and you use math to simplify the simulation of the problem space. But you don't actually simulate every single atom. The probabilistic nature of things at the quantum level, at the atomic level, makes it, one, just very difficult to simulate, period, with any level of accuracy. But then the entire universe, basically the only thing that can simulate the universe is the universe itself. So that would be an intractable problem. That is something that is computationally too complex to do based on everything we know about math today. This relates to breaking decryption. So as you might have seen in plenty of other videos talking about AES security, it is an intractable problem, as far as we know, to crack AES 192 security unless something has changed, unless there is something new out there in quantum computing or deep learning. But as you'll see throughout the rest of the video, it's probably not feasible. So another concept is provability. So provability is, given the problem space, can you establish, given the problem space, a problem and a proposed solution, can you prove that that solution is true or false? And so there are things that are true but not provable. And the easiest way to think about this is very large numbers. Math just keeps going. Within the framework, within the logical framework of math, you can just keep adding decimals. You can just keep adding zeros. And so there is, in grand total, the total complexity of math is infinite. It is an infinite problem space. And so you can very easily create algorithms and formulas and sets that you have assertions that are true but are impossible to prove because math just keeps going. Basically, think of it this way. On a graph, you say y equals x squared. The graph just keeps going forever. So you can make observations about that graph, but eventually x is going to just keep going, or y is going to keep going off into the distance forever and ever. So any assertions about those shapes, they might be true, but you can't prove it because math just keeps going. There's a really great video about this by Veritasium, so I'm not going to spend 20 minutes talking about it, but I think you get the idea. Math just keeps going. And then finally, decidability. So decidability is about algorithms. Do they have a termination point? So this is based on the work of Alan Turing when he was working with at Bletchley Park. to break the Enigma encryption. And so the idea was, or the question at the time, to my understanding, is can you actually like run an algorithm that will eventually end, that will have a definitive output? And so you can create algorithms. You can very easily create algorithms that just never terminate. You can do this on accident in Python when you just do a while true loop, and then if there's a test inside of that while true loop, if x equals blah, then exit. But there might be a situation where x is never true, and therefore the loop never ends. That's the simplest kind of undecidable algorithm that you could make. And you can do it on accident, you can do it on purpose, but within the space of computer science and mathematics and complexity and algorithms, it's actually a non-trivial problem to determine whether or not an algorithm is decidable, because in some cases, even if an algorithm is hypothetically decidable, it might take hundreds or thousands of times the length of the universe's age, to even test the algorithm. And so because of this problem, because of all these problems in math, it's the question is, okay, are all problems fundamentally tractable or decidable? And the answer looks like no. And so this is an axiom of math. And so what I mean by axiom, it is a foundational assertion that some problems are just intractable, that they are intrinsically too hard to solve and cannot be solved in a reasonable amount of time. It is an assumption that some things are true but not provable, and it is also an assumption that some algorithms are just not decidable. These are all assumptions based on what we know about math today, which this forms the mathematical underpinning as to why we trust cryptography. Because the idea is, yes, you can break cryptography, but it is an intractable problem, meaning it would take too long. And there are cryptographic algorithms that are not decidable, meaning you could keep trying to decrypt it forever, but you might never know whether or not you've gotten to the correct answer. So an example of this, I'm not going to go too deep, is Gödel's incompleteness theorems, this is basically just saying that like within a formal system, you can create mathematical paradoxes, logical paradoxes, and things that are undecidable. I just wanted to throw this in because if you wanted to look it up, there's plenty of really great YouTube videos out there about Gödel's incompleteness theorems that basically really break your understanding of how the universe works. But TLDR, P is not equal to NP, and this is like one of the things that basically proves that. Okay, so when we say P equals NP or P does not equal NP, what do we mean? So P-class problems are problems that the time that it takes to solve them scales in polynomial terms with the size of the problem space and the size of the inputs. So a P-class problem means that depending on the size of the problem, the complexity of solving it doesn't go up exponentially. It goes up geometrically. That's a really oversimplification of it. But another way of thinking about it is a P-class problem a human can solve with a calculator. Again, I know that you wouldn't want to solve something with a calculator just because that you could, but it is hypothetically within the realm of possibility that given the right computational resources, the problem is solvable. And so then P equals NP, that is true if the proving of it or the reverse engineering of it is also polynomial time. Now, that doesn't mean that they're symmetric. And so this is one really important thing to understand, is that if P equals NP, that doesn't mean that it's just as easy to create the problem as it is to solve it, or that it's just as easy to encrypt something as it is to decrypt it. It just means that that the reverse engineering or the solution is also in polynomial time, not that it's exponentially more difficult to reverse. But right now, because of the incompleteness theorems and everything else that we talked about, it does look like that hacking something or cracking the decryption is exponentially more difficult than encrypting it and then verifying it if you have the correct key. That is why we assume that P is not equal to NP right now. So the P equals NP question, this is kind of the fundamental understanding of math, and this is the underlying principle that basically everyone reached to that said, like, okay, even if all of this hypothetical stuff about qualia is remotely true, it just doesn't seem plausible on the face of it. From a mathematical perspective, from a computational complexity perspective, it just doesn't look possible. which is why I said in one of my previous videos, um, the implication there is if this algorithm, if this Q-star or qualia algorithm was able to crack AES 192, that assertion necessitates that it discovered some new axioms or principles of math that humans don't understand, and that, as far as we know, humans maybe can't understand. And so this right now, the question is, it's about tractability and decidability. And so right now, in the grand scheme of things, we believe that P is not equal to NP. And this, again, is a fundamental assumption about the way that math works. And of course, math underpins literally like all science. It underpins physics. It underpins, which of course, physics underpins everything else in the physical world. It underpins cryptography. It also underpins artificial intelligence, deep neural networks. And so if P equals NP, then that changes everything that we understand, all the assumptions that we make about what is physically possible, what is mathematically possible, what is cryptographically possible, and what is possible with artificial intelligence, which is why, like I said, and I have said repeatedly, we had better hope that the qualia paper is a hoax. Okay, so as I've mentioned already, the assumption right now is that P is not equal to NP. Basically, that some problems are very difficult and will remain difficult for the foreseeable future. This is the foundation of cryptography, and so if there is one thing, for instance, this alleged qualia thing, if it is possible that an artificial intelligence invalidates this assumption, that throws everything else that we assume into chaos. And I'll unpack some of those implications and mitigations later, just in case. So basically, at the end of the video, I will be talking about whether or not, or if P equals NP, one, what does that mean for the rest of the world? And then two, how do we mitigate it? So an example of P is not equal to NP, the easiest thought experiment is take two extremely large numbers and then multiply them together. And then you know what the inputs were, but then factoring it, reversing that, is a lot harder than going the other way. Likewise, encrypting something is much easier than decrypting it unless you have all the correct ingredients. But decrypting something without the key or without the password or without the hash is much, much, much harder. It's exponentially harder. So that means it is non-polynomial or it is super polynomial, meaning that the computational effort, the number of mathematical steps to go one way, is exponentially or logarithmically or whatever, much, much, much smaller than going the other way. Or in some cases, there are cryptographic functions that are intrinsically one way. They're lossy, meaning that some of the information is necessarily and intrinsically lost during the encryption process, meaning that you don't have enough information to actually even reverse the encryption. You'd have to keep guessing, and you'd have to make assumptions about those missing bits of information, which again, that raises the problem space even higher, because then the amount of stuff that's missing is it's like, when you have redacted stuff on a piece of paper, just like earlier in the video. You could fill in the blanks with that redacted stuff with an infinite number of possibilities, and you can never prove what is in the redacted squares. That's kind of a text-based analogy to P not equal NP. So if P equals NP, this throws everything into chaos. That is a new paradigm shift in terms of computational complexity. It invalidates a tremendous amount of assumptions that we have about mathematics and cryptography. But on the flip side, if that means that some problems become tractable that we thought were intractable, that unlocks an entire new class of problems that we can solve in physics, in AI, in cryptography. But the transition from P not equals NP to P equals NP would be painful, to say the least. So quick recap, we talked about tractability, provability, decidability. We talked about the P equals NP question, the P not equals NP assumption, and then also the fact that all of this is the underpinning of not just cryptography, but primarily cryptography. So now let's transition to the what-if scenario. what if this were true? What if it actually did happen? And then how do we mitigate it? So the implications of P equals NP. First and foremost, national security. So this is the actual NSA headquarters. And the NSA, last I checked, employs like the most and the highest, most qualified mathematicians in the world. And so just kind of riffing on what that means. As I mentioned earlier, if the qualia leak is remotely true, then literally every national security department globally, from MI5, MI6, whatever. Does MI6 even exist? I don't know. But CIA, NSA, whatever the equivalent is of in Russia and China and everywhere else in the world will be scrambling to try and duplicate this effort. And if they succeed, that's the kind of thing that they won't tell the world, because you don't even. So in the game of geopolitical chess, it's often advantageous to not even reveal what your capabilities are. Just like the Enigma machine during World War II, the Allies actually hid the fact that they had broken it because they didn't want the Germans to know that it had been broken. So if anyone breaks AES 192, they would keep that a secret, because then if everyone knows, well, AES 192 is broken, we change the locks, we change the schemes, we go up to AES 256 or something else entirely. So likewise, that's why I said kind of at the beginning of the video, if there's any truth to the qualia leak, we will probably never hear anything about it ever again, unless there's some bulletin put out. And the U.S. government does occasionally put out bulletins saying, hey, we found a day zero vulnerability, you should go fix this. That's happened more often than not. So for instance, there have been some CPU, some x86 architectural vulnerabilities that while I was working in the industry, it's just like, oh yeah, security bulletin was originally published by the Department of Defense or whatever, and then it gets percolated down through all the security vendors, and you get like a notification from Microsoft or VMware saying, hey, run this security patch, and then you look at the history of the patch, and it's like the Department of Defense released a bulletin saying that they discovered this vulnerability, blah blah blah. So anyways, the overarching point here is that this would drastically change what our national security posture looks like from a cybersecurity perspective. And again, if someone breaks it, you don't tell the world that you did, because you want people to go on believing that their security is true. Now, I do remember, I think it was in the 90s or early 2000s, there were some cases of I think it was the NSA or the CIA intervening and saying, hey, could you not actually use that strong encryption? And so it's like, wait, why were they asking that? And I think the example was around, what was it, Signal, the encrypted app on your phone. And so, anyways, the overarching point is that this would really shake up national security. Another component, and this is what some people have asked me, some of my Patreon supporters have asked me, saying like, hey, should I withdraw all my money? And I'm not going to give you any financial advice. But I will say that the likelihood of qualia being true is relatively low, and even if it is, it seems like it would be computationally still way too expensive for most people to do. However, the entire global financial system is still underpinned by cryptography right now, and so if we were to wake up and discover that AES was invalidated, it would probably disrupt the economics globally for at least a little while. But don't panic yet, because there are lots and lots of mitigation strategies, which I'll talk about at the end. And again, as a former IT infrastructure engineer, this was actually my specialty in terms of hardening data centers and ensuring that we have best practices. So there's a lot that you can do around this, but it would disrupt a lot of things and and create a bunch of new vulnerabilities. And so basically the InfoSec guys are going to have a really long few weeks as they harden the environments, but there are mitigation strategies. Someone asked me about blockchain. So if P equals NP, then that actually throws the possibility of the hashing functions that are used in blockchains into jeopardy, meaning you could create a chain, a branch that did look like it was a legitimate branch, even if it wasn't. And so this goes back to the reversibility aspect, where because of the way that some encryption algorithms work, they're lossy, meaning that there's one true path forward, but there are multiple other possibility, like dead ends or false paths forward, that you could accidentally discover, or I guess deliberately discover, and then inject that into the blockchain, and you say, actually, I've now hijacked the entire chain, because this hashing function, you can't decide which result is actually the true one, because they both look legitimate. To say that would erode trust in blockchain more, which we looking at the FTX collapse and everything else, the blockchain is pretty much at an all-time low in terms of trust right now. If P equals NP, then trust in blockchain just goes out the window. Spatial Web Protocol. So this is a little bit less well known right now, but the Spatial Web Protocol is about creating a new markup language that fuses cyberspace with physical space. And there's all kinds of security things baked into that, because you think about smart devices, smart home devices, cars, all kinds of things. So the Spatial Web Protocol would basically be thrown into jeopardy if P equals NP. And so that means basically we go back to the drawing board in terms of edge computing and smart devices, smart home devices, and that sort of thing. Basically, like, everything becomes transparent, kind of like in Cyberpunk 2077. Like, once you hack into a local network, you own it. I'm not saying it would be quite that easy, but that's the level of privacy vulnerability we're looking at in if P equals NP. Okay, so as promised, here are some mitigation strategies, many of which are already in place. So first and foremost, the primary mitigation strategy is MFA, or multi-factor authentication. So you probably are familiar with this, where you log into something and it's like, oh, we sent a text to your phone, or we sent an email to your mailbox. Basically, this is another set of counterfactual validations where it's like, okay, if you are who you say you are the owner of this phone that has that phone number, meaning that the text message we just sent you with a unique information, it took an entirely different path to you. And so therefore, the credentials that you gave us, the username and password, were validated against our hashing functions, our encryption functions. But then we just had a second signal that was sent via an entirely different route. So that's one example of MFA. So the kind of rule of thumb is, it's something you have, something you know, and something that you are. So something you have could be a phone. It could be a USB key fob. It could be like the chip in your credit card, because the chip in your credit card is a cryptographic device that only one of them exists, and if you send a counterfactual sign, it processes it in such a way that only that chip is capable of processing. So that is an example of MFA. There's other kinds of MFA, such as biological. So for instance, a fingerprint scanner, retinal scanner, voice print, those kinds of things. There's all kinds of information that you can add into an authentication scheme. And I forgot to include a slide for this, but you can make something completely secure, but it's a trade-off between convenience and security. So, if you watch like Mission Impossible and other spy movies, where it's like, oh, hey, in order to get into the super secret vault, you have to do the hand scanner and the retinal thumbprint and all those other things. It's less convenient, but it's more secure. Likewise, there are plenty of ways that you can use MFA in order to make things more secure but less convenient. So, like, as a solution, that already exists, and we're already pretty good at it. Would cracking AES 192 jeopardize that? It would make it a little more difficult, but the next thing is zero trust. So, in the IT infrastructure space, in the cybersecurity space, we've already been working towards a zero trust environment. So a zero trust environment means that you basically don't trust any digital signal, that you assume that every digital signal is almost certainly an attempt to hack into you or compromise your systems, because in an environment where 70+% of all internet traffic is bots, and then depending on how vulnerable your target is, it is just mathematically true that most signals cannot be trusted. And so when you're operating in a zero trust environment, you assume that every ping that you get is potentially malicious or hostile. So that means you use continuous verification. You use different security schemes, such as MFA, device level security, and so on and so forth. You also use network segmentation, which is actually why I thought that the Cyberpunk 2077 subnet hacking scheme was actually relatively interesting, because in the Cyberpunk 2077 universe, the internet is so dangerous that we have just left the internet altogether and left it to the AIs. And so the only thing that exists are local subnets that are completely disconnected. So that's network segmentation. So we're actually moving towards a world where you have increasing network segmentation. And this is why things like cars, internet connected cars, they are not cybersecurity experts. And so cars are like one of the least secure things right now. And I'd be happy to be wrong. I'm sure they're catching up quickly, but I've heard horror stories of you can hijack someone's car, you can steal it just by intercepting their fob. You can spy on the people in a car just because, put it this way, the automotive industry doesn't understand zero trust yet, as far as I know, last I heard. Device security. So your smartphone has, at any given time, at least 4 or 5 sensors. Many of them have much more. So you've got a camera. A camera can record a short video of your face and say, oh yeah, that's a real face and it's moving just like Dave's face usually does. Now, obviously my face exists on the internet, so that's not the most secure thing. Microphone, voice print. My voice also exists on the internet. There's a proximity sensor though. So your phone knows, when you put it up to your face, it changes modes because it senses that there is something physically present. There's also an accelerometer, so it knows what its orientation is in space, and it knows that it's being vibrated. That's how your phone knows that you're carrying it or that it's in your pocket, or how many steps you've taken. And so because of that information, you can record what does it feel like when it's being held by a human, and you know that if a phone is being held by a human. Fingerprint sensors, temperature sensors, 3D scanners. So these devices are actually some of the most secure devices in the world, and they provide a plethora of information that can be used for MFA schemes. And so that's why in the MFA scheme, something if you have a physical device that is cryptographically enabled and also has a tremendous amount of biological telemetry, that greatly increases your ability to prove identity, which is also why I think that WorldCoin with its Oculus iris scanner is really idiotic. We already have comprehensive security devices that can prove your identity very, very definitively. And not only that, they can continuously prove your identity, because the WorldCoin orb is really dumb because it's a special piece of hardware and only a few exist. And so you verify your identity once, and then what? That doesn't work in a zero trust environment because you need continuous identity verification. And then finally, defense in depth. So I've talked about defense in depth in other videos, but basically this is a layered security model that it was published, I think, by the U.S. Department of Defense. Anyways, this is the current best practice, universal best practice in terms of having multiple layers of cybersecurity, including physical layer, network, computer, application, device, all the way down, which means that even if you get through one layer of defense, you're probably not going to get through the rest of them. And this, again, there's plenty of concepts within defense in depth, such as network segmentation, air gapping, firewalls, principle of least privilege access, that sort of thing. So even if we were to lose AES encryption tomorrow, there's a lot that we can do to mitigate that risk. And as I've mentioned, we're already moving towards a lot of it. MFA, that's something that is, honestly, it is by default in many services. And then device security, biological telemetry, that sort of thing. There's all kinds of options. So it would be super inconvenient. It would be really interesting, but the world would probably not shut down if AES was broken tomorrow. And if the NSA does have a way of breaking AES 192, they're not going to tell us. Again, just look at history as an example, with the Enigma being broken at Bletchley Park. So thanks for watching. I do have a couple little bits of news. I'm moving, so I'll be much more scarce for a little while. My next masterclass is December 8th. and the next Discord Q&A. So that's a big, all Patreon, all hands on deck. Discord is going to be on December 15th. And this is all accessible via my Patreon, link in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this. Cheers.